Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're going to talk about Zionism, Judaism, U.S. hegemony, and how the current events in Gaza are going to have a long-term effect on all of the above. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and I think this is this will be an interesting subject to talk about, a very, very interesting subject to talk about. And, people are always afraid to talk about things like this, but my thing is this, I think that people should be able to have a intellectual and philosophical discussion about anything. Whatever it is, you should be able to have an intellectual and philosophical discussion on it. Look, there are people who have motives to discredit what others say and attack people, whatever the case may be. On this channel, we just talk about what is and let everything else let the world figure itself out. So let's talk. So let me first give you a little bit of my experience. I am by no stretch of the imagination any kind of a Jewish scholar on Judaism or even Zionism for that matter. I know the basics. I know what I've heard, listened to and read online about the history of Zionism and Theodor Herzl and the kind of stuff that certainly appears to me that Zionism, based on my limited research, was it was a political movement. It was also pushed by people who were, I guess the term would be, considered. There's even discussion about that. Who's really Jewish? That's a question that I'm in no position to answer, right? But a lot of the people who were involved, to the best of my understanding, in creating Zionism were atheists. So they were technically, I guess, however you want to argue it, ethnically Jewish. They called themselves Jewish, whatever. But a lot of people were atheists. What that means or whether that matters, I can't really tell you, but that appears to be so. Additionally, we do know that the British Empire were the ones who kind of got the ball rolling, shall we say, for Zionism and the eventual creation of the State of Israel. I do know that there have been various areas that were looked into that were considered for this new Israeli project, such as in Africa, such as actually up in upstate New York, near Buffalo, near the Canadian line, in that area. There were various areas that were looked at, considered. Whether that matters, I don't know, but that does tell you something about those people, at least, who were making those considerations, seeing Zionism as a political project of some point, of some kind, not necessarily tied to a specific place. I do also believe that, based on my experience, Zionism was part of the Imperial World Project initially, and part of the Imperial World Project of Great Britain. I have heard it said that the period of time in which Great Britain decided to switch from, sailing ships and things like that to utilizing petroleum-based fuels had something to do with it. And at that point, they saw the Middle East as a very important part of their imperial project. So all of these things are interjected into it. The bottom line is Zionism, from my perspective, from my research, appears to have been more of an imperial slash hegemonic project than a religious project. It certainly appears that way to me. Other people may argue otherwise, but that's what it appears to me. Let us continue. And of course, I've seen all of this stuff online. I've read about the Nakba and I've saw kind of stuff, lots of stuff on it. But the bottom line is that that's the long and short of it. So my experience with researching Zionism is limited, but I know what I've seen over my lifetime. and what I have experienced over my lifetime, and what I've experienced from my experience of Zionism is it seems to be a political ideology first and foremost. It seems to be a political ideology that is extremely important to initially the British Empire, and then subsequently both the U.S. and the British Empire as they combined. And since the imperial and colonial countries in U.S., such as France, in Europe, are inextricably linked to the U.S./British Empire, then of course it's also important to them. If it's important to keep the U.S. Empire hegemonic, then it's certainly, for instance, France had its, how was France able to maintain, their ability to colonialize Africa, to rob and steal from the countries in Africa? Well, because the U.S. Empire had bases all over Africa and had a military presence all over Africa and had an intelligence presence all over Africa. So France has been able to piggyback on these things in order to maintain its presence in Africa. And you will notice that as the U.S. empire weakens, France's grip on Africa also weakens. Those two things are not separate. When you see what's happening in the Sahel region, when you see former Francophone African countries start to pull away from France, it's because the U.S. empire is weaker, and France is holding on to these things using the resources of the U.S. empire. That's one of the reasons that France and these other colonial powers are so subservient to the U.S. empire, because it helps them maintain their kind of international colonies, what little they have left of them. Now, this is all important because it gets back to why is it that France and the UK and all of these other countries in Europe, why are they helping the U.S. in its, Zionism, in its Zionist project in Israel? Why are the governments, the ruling elite, exposing their countries to such turmoil, political turmoil and political instability? Because they feel that they have no choice, because they have to try to hold on to Zionism, because I believe, again, my opinion, that they see Israel as the linchpin of U.S. supremacy, U.S. hegemony, that a big part of U.S. hegemony is to be able to control choke points, shall we say. You hear them talk about that. Choke points on the sea. Can we control the international shipping lanes, right? So that we can choke someone else off. But even more importantly, they want to be able to control, or even though they can't control it, at least to have a significant effect on the lifeblood of international industry right now, which is what? Which is oil and to some extent gas, but mostly oil, but a lot of gas too, coming out of the Middle East. So the U.S., I believe that if you ask, why does the U.S. seem hell-bent on giving it all up to make sure they hold Israel together? And I believe it is, they see it, that they basically, the ruling elite of the U.S. say, if we can't either control or have a significant effect on oil, then we're not an empire anymore. So it's existential to them. They see Israel losing it, Israel washing away as the U.S. empire wiping away, because additionally, Israel is a huge military / intelligence base. When you talk about the Mossad, MI6, and the CIA are inextricably linked. All you need to do is look at the Epstein operation, right? Clearly that was Mossad. Clearly that was CIA. And clearly it was also MI6. My gosh, why would the Prince Andrew's involved, right? Think about this. What kind of people were involved? The highest in the Brits, the highest in the US, the two places that, the people who saw Zionism as the, the highest level of US imperialism, the most important cog in the wheel of US imperialism. The people who saw that knew, man, we got to be able to control these people at the highest level. Should somehow our project be in jeopardy, we got to make sure that the people who are in charge hold on to it no matter what. So, to say that Epstein, as the mainstream media wants to say, was just some kind of a pervert, just some kind of a bad guy, ignores the overwhelming evidence, not the least of which being, if you remember, the guy, his last name was Acosta, maybe Alex, I don't remember, who was in the Trump administration. And how did the whole Epstein thing blow up? How did it all explode? It started when he was asked, and he admitted it, that he was asked when he was in Florida, why did you allow Jeffrey Epstein, who was convicted of these horrible crimes, to basically get a slap on the wrist, to get nothing? We looked at it, and the guy got like a year, and he didn't even really have to spend a year with weekends in jail, and he didn't even have to spend them in jail. And he said, I was told he's intelligence, leave it alone, right? So and then he was sent on about his business. Apparently it was good enough for whoever was questioning him to vet him for the Trump administration. So he's being vetted to be in the Trump administration. And when they ask him about it, he says, I was told it's intelligence. And what do the people who are vetting him say? Oh, yeah, sure, of course. Well, okay, move on about your business. So we know that was it. I mean, you can look at the even the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing. And there's you look at that, and that seems to clearly be an intelligence operation, on and on and on. And there were some things that Bill Clinton was doing that the Zionists may not be too thrilled with. But explain to me why the woman, her name was oh gosh, I'm having a brain cramp here. But the woman who befriended Monica Lewinsky, who talked to her on the phone, and who recorded 20 hours of their conversations. And do you know what she did for a living before she was at the White House? She worked for military intelligence. And do you know where she was moved to? She was in the White House working for Vince Foster. You know where she was moved to after they moved her out of the White House? They moved her over to the Pentagon. She was paid by the Pentagon. The woman who befriended Monica Lewinsky and recorded 20 hours of her discussions, who, when Monica Lewinsky said, I want to go have this blue dress cleaned, convinced her not to have it cleaned. That woman was former military intelligence, and was Linda Tripp, and was working for the Pentagon at that time. She wasn't former military intelligence, she was military intelligence. And when you walked in Epstein's house, what did you see in Epstein's house? The first thing you walked in his mansion in New York, a picture of Bill Clinton in a blue dress, the infamous blue dress. I've always argued that the reason that for quite a while that Epstein was in and out of the Clinton White House was not necessarily because he was meeting with Clinton, as it were. I think part of it could have been he was running this operation. There's a lot more that meets the eye, but my bottom line is this. When you understand the connection between the origin of it was a Zionist project, Israel, the occupation of Palestine, when you understand the nexus between that and U.S. international power and U.S. attempt to control the flow of international oil, you realize that it has nothing to do to the people who are pushing for U.S. hegemony, to that ruling elite. It has nothing to do with religion to them. I think it's convenient. It certainly works for them, right? But I do think for them, it is just simply something they do for power. It's something they use. You can see right now the project in Ukraine, the Ukraine project. It's a project that's being used to do something, to a means to an end. People use the term for Israel. When people talk about Israel, you'll hear various terms depending on how they feel about it. You'll hear the word Israel. You'll hear people call it the Zionist state. You'll hear people call it the Zionist project. You'll hear people call it occupied Palestine. And depending upon your perspective, all of those things could be valid to you, to the person who's using those terms. But all of those terms have a meaning to them. Even the occupied Palestine, of course, that's the argument that this is the state of Palestine and it is being occupied by people who shouldn't be occupying it, right? The Zionist project sounds like the Ukraine project, doesn't it? In other words, that puts it as an imperial project that is used by the US/British Empire for their imperial machinations, right? Um, Israel is simply an acceptance that, hey, you know what? This is a country. It is a state. We can like it, not like it, lump it, whatever. It doesn't matter. It is now officially a state, and you have to accept it. They accept it. So there's people that won't accept it. There's people that argue it. Me, I see it as, I think, depending upon the context, all of those things can be, it just depends on how you see it, can be appropriate for you, depending on how you say it, any and all of them, just depending on how you want to describe it. You know what I mean? It's like me. Garland, okay, what is he? He's a male. Yeah. He's a black person. Yeah. He's a heterosexual. Yeah. He's a, depending on what age, he's a middle-aged guy. He's an old guy, right? All of those things are different. He's a Homo sapien. He's a whatever you want to call it, right? He's a carbon-based being. You can come up with all of these terms to describe me, but depending upon the context in which you're using them, all of them can be accurate, right? Under international law, number one, Israel was created by the UN. But on the other side of it, you even have to question that and say, does the UN have the right to come in to an existing country and say this existing country is now that existing country? So even then, the argument that it was created by the United Nations, a lot of people question it, right? That just because the UN says they can do it or they do it, does that mean that it's legal? Does that mean that it's moral? Does that mean that it is just? And here's what I mean when I say, is it legal, moral, and just? For instance, during slavery, there was a law that said you had to run away. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed. If somebody was a slave and you ran away, by law, you had to return them. Was that moral and just? No, there was a lot of people who were opposed to slavery, and they helped slaves run away, and they had the Underground Railroad, and they helped ship them off to Canada or wherever, right? So what they did was moral and just. It was illegal. So just because something is legal doesn't mean it's either moral or just. And as Martin Luther King and many people over the course have talked about is, if a law is illegal, then do you do the legal thing or the moral thing or the just thing? Well, that's up to you, right? But so you can talk about Israel from a perspective of morality, legality, and justice. And I mean more of an international cosmic justice. A justice in the same way that you can look at something and see whether it's just or not. Is it justice? Oftentimes has to do with consistency. Can they do it? Yeah. Can that be? Well, can we bomb Yugoslavia? Yes. Can you bomb Ukraine? No. What's the difference? I'm doing it. I can do it. You can't. That's of supremacy, hegemony. Now, let me continue with all of this and get into some more of the issue of religion a little bit. Judaism. One of the things I think, let me see how much. One of the things I think that's consequential here for a lot of people, and it will be consequential going into the future, is the connection between connection/perception of the, I don't want to use the word alliance. I'm looking for the right word. Let's just say connection, okay, between Zionism and Judaism, in that many of us view Zionism as a political movement, and as a result of many things that have happened in Israel, and particularly recently in Gaza and ongoing in Gaza, many people view Israel as a very violent and very fascist political movement, as a negative. They view there are a lot of people in the world. I think now we have a plurality in the United States, about 50%, that now are starting to really have some serious questions and in opposition to the policies of the Israeli government. I believe that if you go into, say, a 30 and under, the numbers will probably be 70 or 80%. Depends on simply which group of people that you go into the United States. But throughout the world, I think the world is now looking at Israel as a bit of a rogue state, as a violent state, and looking at Zionism as a very violent. A lot of people feel that it's a fascist and violent and brutal, unhinged, dare I say, way of thinking, just a way of viewing the world that is repugnant to many people, right? And I think that that is going to have a long-term effect on Judaism. I think there are many people who I know, who I see online, who I see in the chat, who are struggling with something. And they're struggling with their belief that you should not paint any one group of people as a bad group of people, this group of people is evil or good, bad or whatever, particularly in light of what happened with the Holocaust, and particularly as it applies to the Jewish people. I think there are people who are seeing that a lot of the anti-Zionist, anti-war movement is actually led by a lot of Jewish people, that at the forefront of it, there's a lot of Jewish people. At the same time, they're struggling with another reality. And the other reality is that if you go to synagogues around the United States, overwhelmingly, you're going to see people saying, I support Israel in whatever they're doing. Now that, of course, I guess is starting to somewhat decrease, but the numbers are overwhelming. If you go to synagogues, you'll see the Israeli flags. You'll see the people saying we support Israel. The numbers are, overwhelming of people who practice Judaism in the United States, and I can't speak for the rest of the world, who support Zionism and support Israel. And the question is, in Judaism, and there's no polls done, what percentage of people who practice Judaism, who consider themselves Jewish, support what many of us believe is obvious actions that we interpret as evil? Because then here's what you have. I believe there are a lot of people, and I believe this is something that's going on that's very dangerous. And I've talked about it before, and very scary and worrying to me. There are people who, if they tie Judaism and Zionism together, and they see Zionism as a very evil ideology, and they believe that this ideology is having an extremely negative impact on the United States, will then transfer their anger and negativity to Jewish people in general, right? But let me add another addition to that, and I think it's important to say to bring this into account. And that is, as an example, if you looked at the Biden administration, and if you looked at the people around him, right? Now, you could say they were overwhelming. They were Jewish. What are Jewish people? 1 or 2% of the United States population, but probably 70% or higher of his cabinet, of his inner circle, right, was Jewish. And I don't have the exact number, but we can look around him and we can see that the people around him were, I'll put it like this: it was a hell of a lot more than 1 or 2%. The representation in Joe Biden's cabinet, as in Donald Trump's cabinet, as in Bill Clinton's cabinet, on and on, the representation of Jewish people is significantly higher, is exponentially higher than the representation of Jewish people in the overall population. Couple that with a couple of things. Couple that with the fact that the U.S. empire is on a significant downward trend, right? That the U.S. the economy and all of these things are going straight to hell, and the people are unhappy with it. Couple that with the fact that the U.S. Foreign policy is sheer madness. It is sheer madness to many of us, particularly those of us who are anti-war, but many people who aren't anti-war are looking at it and saying, my God, you want to go to war with Russia? That's going to get us all killed. My God, you want to go with China? That's going to get us all killed. My God, you're trying to go to war with Iran? Wait a minute. You're trying to go to war with Russia, China, and Iran all at the same time? You're threatening to attack Iran. You're involved in a hot war with Russia. And you're saying war with China is imminent. Pete Hegseth just said war with China is imminent, while we are in a literal hot war with Russia that the American people were given no say in, while our government says if Iran doesn't do what we want to, we will attack Iran. It's either do what we want or we attack you, right? And the American people are saying, we want you to focus on us and our material and economic needs. Okay. Now, why do I bring that up? Because once again, if you couple that with the reality that most of the current and the previous, let's just go with those, and I could go on, um, administrations have a very, very high degree of Jewish people, particularly Jewish people that are Zionists, not like a Medea Benjamin, not like a Max Blumenthal, not the people that say we don't want war, we want peace, and we don't agree with Netanyahu, and we don't agree, not those kinds of people. It's Zionist of the highest order. I bring all that together to say this. I put all that together to say this. My fear. What that adds up to is this. It adds up to, at some point, and I've been saying this for a long time, at some point, things are going to go to hell in this country. They're going there in a hurry. But what people haven't felt is, they haven't felt the real truth. They're feeling the economic crunch coming from neoliberalism, but they haven't had an economic smash from an absurd foreign policy that says we're going to attack Iran, and then you attack Iran, and then they close the Straits of Hormuz, and then oil goes through the roof, and then Americans wake up one day and they say, what the hell's going on? And they go to the gas station. They sure you can buy gas for $15 a gallon. And of course, if gas is $15 a gallon and diesel fuel is $18 a gallon, and everything in the grocery store is brought there as a result of using diesel trucks and diesel trains and blah, 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 and jet fuel and all of that, that means a collapsed economy. I could get into more details, but what that means is hyperinflation and a collapsed economy. If the U.S. pursues a foreign policy, continues down this road, and it results, which it quite possibly may, and it results in a sudden calamitous, cataclysmic collapse, as would be the case if we were to go into a hot war with Russia, China, or Iran. And in the instance of Russia or China, it probably won't matter because we'll all be nuked anyway. So then, yay, hooray, we're all dead. At least we don't have any worries at that point, right? Doesn't matter. But my point being this, we don't get nuked, we clash with Iran, and everything goes to hell. Here's my point that I think, if you don't take anything else from this video, here's a concern, a thought that I have. And let me, as I said, I've told many times, many people don't know, my brother, who passed away, he died a year or so ago of prostate cancer, was former military, special forces, all that kind of stuff. And when he was in the military, he converted to Judaism. So my brother was Jewish. So he and I would have these kind of long conversations about this stuff. And I think this, because he was born a black guy in who was, Southern Baptist, because he was born in that community, because he's older than me and he dealt with a lot more things of discrimination than I could have possibly seen, or known about. He was considerably older. My half brother, he was 20 years older than me. And because of all of that, he had a perspective that I couldn't really understand. You know what I mean? But I could listen to what he said. And he had an understanding and a view of the world, I think, that was different than the Zionists, shall we say, because of his background. Clearly, right? Guy that grew up when there were segregated schools is going to see the world a little bit differently, right? Anyway, so my point being, we would have these long discussions. And part of the discussion was about his view on the Holocaust and his concern way back, his concern that, and he talked about this, look, there's a lot of Jewish people in high places in the government. He would say this to me. My concern is that if everything gets screwed up, they're going to blame the Jews. And they're going to come blow up my synagogue on a Saturday, when I'm going to be in an event and I'm going to get blown up. And I don't even agree with his exact words. And I don't even agree with that shit, right? He'd say, I don't agree with, he was not a Zionist at all. He didn't, see what Israel was doing as a religious thing. He saw that as a political, he was Green Beret. He was a former soldier. So he also saw it through the lens of a soldier. Right. And he said, when it comes to war making, you should never make war unless there's no other alternative. And you should never use. And his big argument was, I see people who are soldiers, who are war makers, and they're at all of these. They're in the occupied territories, and they are up against men, women, and children. I see a 14-year-old boy and a bunch of soldiers who are trained killers, trained soldiers, and they're standing around a 14-year-old boy holding him down. He says, it was Green Beret. He says, I wasn't trained to fight 14-year-old unarmed boys. I was trained to fight other soldiers. And he had a big problem with that. And so, needless to say, when it came to Israel, he and I were very, very similar. And he was Jewish. He was Jewish. But at any rate, so the thing I think that I take from what's happening based on a number of things. For instance, I had this. Since I've been doing this, I think I really started stepping up in 2022 is when I really increased my presence on my channel. The channel was fairly dead before then. And I think that over the course of that time, I have thought about this particular issue and going forward, what are people saying in the chat? I've thought about this issue, and in the back of my mind and in the background, every now and then, I will always look at the chat and see the progression of things and see how things are changing, right, over the course of time. I didn't talk about it. I don't talk about it now, but I look at the chat. Sometimes when I'm, not on, I'll just go through and I'll go into YouTube Studio and I'll look through the chat and I'll see what kind of patterns I'm seeing, right? What changes I'm seeing, what kind of attitudes I'm seeing, right? And one of the patterns and one of the attitudes that I've noticed increasing in the chat and in the other chat is this, a very anti-Semitic, I'll put it like this, aura, whatever you want to say it, starting to get brighter. Yes, there are people who clearly are angry at Zionism and Israel and who voice that clearly, right? But what I have noticed significantly more is there are people who take that anger, I guess, and turn it into pure anti-Semitism. And you'll see in the chat, and they'll say the Jews. And some people, I guess they figure they can't say it on YouTube, so they'll put JOOS or JOOZ, right? And they'll basically say the Jews as if, yep, Max Blumenthal, Medea Benjamin, all of the not in my name people, all of the Jewish people who are fighting against this thing, them too, just because they're Jewish. All Jews, right? They don't differentiate. And there are people that do that. There are people that look at black folks, the blacks this, or this group that. The easiest thing to do is to not differentiate. The easiest thing to do is to say this group of people, this is how they are. That group of people's like that. That group of people's like that. It's easy. It's lazy thinking. You do not have to delineate and say there's 10 different people, and all 10 different of those people have different way of seeing things. It's funny. I had a friend of mine once who was talking about his sons, and they were saying they were like, yeah, somebody was talking about or sending him something about young black men who are vulnerable for this and that, and how they should this and that to help young black men. And we were talking, and he's like, my kids go to private school. You know what I mean? Yes, they're young black men. They go to private school. You know what I mean? The guy has like a second house, a beach house down in Rehoboth, Delaware. He ain't broke. His kids ain't vulnerable. You know what I mean? So it's the idea that, yes, these are two young black men. They're vulnerable. Well, I mean, maybe if the police stop them, you might say they're more likely to get shot. But when it comes to the fact that, they're living pretty damn well, you just say two young black vulnerable men. Society's it. You can make an argument that the color of their skin or there's racism and blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is they ain't economically vulnerable, from that perspective, right? There's sure issues, but it's putting everybody there. He's a black man, young man, and he's 14 years old. Therefore, there's no difference between this young kid who's in a friggin' school where his parents paying $20,000 a semester and this other young kid who's in absolute poverty and maybe his parents are alcoholics or drug addicts or just poor and can't make ends meet. There's no difference between those two 14-year-olds. I'm sorry, there's a significant difference between the two of them, right? So my point is, when somebody says the Jews, oh yeah, the Jews. So Max Blumenthal and all these Jewish people who are opposed to it, no. But that's lazy thinking, and that's what people tend to do. But my point is this. I have noticed a significant increase in that. A significant increase in people who are angry at Judaism and those who practice Judaism, and they don't stop to divide up. There's some people in Judaism who believe this, there's others who believe that, there's these Orthodox Jews who don't believe that Israel, ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox, there's people that don't believe that Israel should exist as it is, that Israel can't come back until, be formed until the Messiah, it comes back, and all this other stuff. Nope. That's complicated stuff. It requires an intellectual view of this thing. It involves picking it all apart. It's a whole lot easier to just say the JOOS are fill in the blank. And that kind of mentality, which America has a propensity towards, I'll just say that. History tells us that, not just America, I'll put it to you like this. If like a lot of times I like to say this, look, if I were, I try to view politics and all that stuff through the lens of an alien. Somebody dropped me on this earth out of a spaceship, just drop, plink, there you are, darling. And I'm like, what's going on? You're on your own. You got to learn. And I got to just look around and try to figure out what's going on. And as I've said, I would not be impressed with with humanity. Now, the other animals are kind of like them. They're pretty smooth. But when it comes to humans, my God, they are just a group of warring tribes, knuckle dragging warring tribes, all trying to put each other in boxes so they can not like the Jews or the blacks or the Mexicans or the Russians or the whatever. I mean, look at the Europeans. My God, the leadership of Europe is the most backwards, knuckle dragging Neanderthal, and I'm sorry about that, I apologize, the Neanderthals group on earth. They used to be like, yes, the Africans and these Asians, these other peoples are backwards. And I look at the European ruling elite now, and you couldn't be any more backwards. The stupidest people. They're like, yes, we must prepare for a war with Russia. And how are you going to do that? You don't have an army. Yeah, but we're going to increase our military spending by 5%. And you're like, yeah, but your economy is increasing by 6%. So you don't have it. Oh, by the way, you don't have any industry to build this stuff with. Oh, by the way, the people don't want to go to war. Oh, and on and on and on. And the leadership of Europe just goes, we're preparing for war with Russia. Germany, I'm reading this articles where the Germans are building bomb shelters all over. We're going to build bomb shelters everywhere to prepare for war with Russia. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, because you can afford to build bomb shelters and you have the technology to build bomb shelters. You can't afford to build an actual military to fight a Russia. You don't have the technology to build a military. You don't have the money to build a military. You don't have the industry to build a military to fight with Russia. So you say, we're preparing to fight with Russia. All right, you're going to build fighter planes? We got no money for that. Tanks? Yeah, you kidding me? Where are we going to get that money from? Okay, how about aircraft systems? The ones we have, anti-aircraft air defense. The ones we have don't work, and if we did build them, they don't really work, and we don't have money to build them anyway. Nor do we have the defense. We can't build the military to fight Russia. Okay, what are you going to do? We're going to build bomb shelters to prepare for Russia because that's all we can build. Basically, Germany's building bomb shelters to prepare for a war with Russia, not because they need bomb shelters, because that's all they can afford to build. And I'm like, okay. Now, do I say all Europeans and Germans are therefore a bunch of idiots? No, I say the ruling elite don't seem to be too bright. But again, what is it now? The Russians are evil. We must prepare. The Russians want to attack us and fight us. Well, wouldn't it be a lot less expensive to call the Russians and say, how can we make a deal with you guys and perhaps have a new security architecture? No! We can't trust them. We'd rather prepare for a war that we know will go nuclear and then we'll all die. We must prepare for nuclear war. We must defeat Russia. They will then nuke us and we'll all die. That's what the preparations are for. And I'm like, a spaceship come back and get me? Leave the hell off of this planet? These people are not worth saving. That's what I thought. But they are worth saving because this is the ruling elite. And instead, what we're looking at is a ruling elite that is oppressing the people in their own country. So God knows they want to oppress everybody else around the world. So that's the saving grace for the working class people. For those of us who scream, working class people of the world, unite. That's why. Look at the ruling elite of our country. Anyway, let me continue. Here's something you got to take into account also. Where did the Holocaust happen? In Europe. The United States has a history of being anti-Semitic. For instance, at the time that there was this hierarchical apartheid country and black folks weren't allowed to do anything and couldn't go to certain colleges, but these same colleges couldn't be any more than 10% Jewish. So Jews were facing discrimination also. But here's the reality. Most discrimination against the Jews was never in the Middle East or in the Muslim world. They lived along the Muslims with peace. It was in the so-called Christian West. So now, isn't it interesting that the people who have been historically the most anti-Semitic are the ones who actually were involved in the Holocaust? And let's face it, the Holocaust was, one may say, the explosion of anti-Semitism, but it had been going on for centuries, for 1,000 years. And all of a sudden, boom, anti-Semitism blew up in the West. But it was always bubbling and simmering and everywhere, and then it exploded. And then they said, look at that, the Muslims are anti-Semitic. And what was their plan to fix it? Let's get the Jews the hell out of here and send them over there. Like, you didn't really want them here in the first place. You killed them and mistreated them when they were there. And as soon as you, the ruling elite of the West were behind that. As soon as the ruling elite of the West wipe out as many Jews as they can, and then they say, what is your plan? Well, let's get rid of the rest of them and we'll send them over here. Like, these people were never the friends of the Jewish people by any stretch of the imagination. And now what's going on? As they use Judaism as their excuse to maintain hegemony, who's going to take the hit when it's all said and done? And this is my concern, that at some point, Americans and people in the West, and I see it coming a mile away, are going to say, our lives have gone to hell. They told us to blame Putin. Well, that's gone. They told us to blame the immigrants. We threw a lot of immigrants out. Nothing happened. Things got worse, if anything. They gave us plenty of people to blame, right? And no matter how many we blamed, nothing happened. And everything's gone to hell. Is there anybody left to blame? Well, it's funny that you say that. Now that you ask me, is there anybody to blame? We got one group. And who is this group? If we go after Iran on behalf of Israel, think about this. The U.S. says we're going to war with Iran. Go to war with Iran. And as many predict, Iran, if they just close down the Straits of Hormuz. Now, if they bomb the living hell, if they missile the living hell out of our bases and sink our ships, and a lot of Americans get killed, right? And the U.S. says, well, that's it. We're throwing a nuke at them. Well, at that point, they're going to flatten all that, which you throw some nukes at them, whatever. At that point, they're going to flatten the oil infrastructure in the region and wipe out our economy for good, for our lives, for the decades to come. Okay. Oh, did I mention you're going to have fallout all over the place, and people may never be able to use the lifetime of humanity, may never be able to access that oil again because it's all covered with nuclear or whatever, right? God only knows what else could happen. Bottom line is this. On behalf of Israel, the U.S. attacks Iran, and that's it. It's game, set, and match. We now live in an environment, in a society that would make the crash of 29 look like the heydays, the great old days, the roaring 20s, right? The powerful 50s and 60s, or as compared to what we'd be in. And now people are hungry. They're so poor. There's so much hyperinflation. It would take a wheelbarrow full of dollars to buy the wheelbarrow to carry your wheelbarrow full of dollars. That's how much hyperinflation we have. Who do you think Americans are going to blame? See, that's the thing. And And you know how the ruling elite are here, and you know how our government is. When Americans look for somebody to blame, the people who made the decisions aren't going to take responsibility and say we did it, because they'll be afraid that their heads will get cut off or they'll be hanged, and they will be in danger of such things. My suspicion is there's a group of people that are weak, that were overwhelmingly representative in the government and decision-making process, and they're a small group. So why not blame the Jews? See, my belief is that eventually the government of the United States will be happy to shirk the responsibility that they had for disaster, cataclysm, and calamity, and say, well, we would have done it if the Jewish people hadn't made us do it. Well, whose fault was it? They'll start to say, well, it was Victoria Nuland, and then it was Tony Blinken, and you'll notice that everybody that gets blamed is going to be Jewish, to the point where they don't have to put together what they're saying. There's no need to, and it'll turn into, look what Israel has done to us. And let's go back to the beginning. Go around the country and see all these synagogues and all of these Jewish communities that have signs, Israel, I support Israel, that have Israeli flags up, et cetera, and they're standing there saying, I support Israel, Israeli flags. And what happens? And the tide turns, and the government and the people in power start to say, ooh, everything has gone real bad, and we don't want you to cut our heads off and hang us. Who was it? Well, we wouldn't, if we hadn't listened to those Zionists, we would never be in this jam. We never really wanted to do it. We weren't 100% in charge. We didn't want to do that. We were forced. They forced us, and they put people in the government that we needed, and they did everything, and they're going to shirk the blame everywhere. They will shirk the blame. And the problem is this, that there's fertile ground for this, that there's dry tinder for that kind of spark. Because right now, as a result of what's happening in Gaza, coupled with the fact that the support for what's happening in Gaza at times seems almost ubiquitous in the Jewish, ubiquitous, everywhere, overwhelming in the Jewish community, it will be very easy to say, see, they all supported it. We didn't really want to do it. What were we going to do? They've got lots of money. They got this and that. They pushed us into it. And now look what happened. We have calamity. We should have never listened to them. It's the old, it wasn't my fault. You made me do it. Garland, why'd you rob that bank? I didn't want to do it. He made me do it. It wasn't my fault. I didn't want to do it. It is. And if you think that the ruling elite won't do that, then you don't understand the ruling elite. Let me put this straight. As an example, look in the chat right now, and you'll see all kind of anti-Semitic report. Not Zionism, not any particular Jewish people, Jews. They don't like Max Blumenthal. They don't like Medea Benjamin. They don't like the people who are leading a movement against Zionism. Nope, sorry, they're Jewish. That's good enough. You know, I've often believed this. And when it comes to this, when somebody does that, I don't like fill in the blank. You know, over the course of my life, I've had people say things to me about a particular group, right? Yeah, well, you know, the fill in the blanks, the Jews this, Jews that. I'm always wary, particularly as a Black person. Let me tell you why. The way I view the world is this. It is a particular way of thinking, and it's a very lazy way of thinking, to say this entire group fits in this box. And it's an absurd way of thinking. It's an anti-intellectual way of thinking, but it's a way of thinking. And either you can do it or you can't. As an example, I can't, because I see the world as a complicated thing. And I understand that the box doesn't exist, that I create a box mentally to put people in. All men are like this. All short guys are like this. All women are like this. All Greeks are like this. All whatever. Now, there are certainly cultural issues that are undeniable. There's certainly cultures that have particular things in their culture. But because somebody's a member of the group does not mean that they align with that culture. We got to look into it. But so understanding that all of the boxes that we put people in are created by us. I create the box, and I can create a new box anytime I want to. people with glasses, people who own horses, people who don't like pets, people who enjoy flying, people who have toe fungus. Where does it stop? The number of boxes that I can create is infinitive, right? So once I create the box and I understand that the box is created by me to put people in, and then I say, I created a box and everybody in the world conforms to my box. It's the ultimate narcissism. You know what it's like they say a baby thinks that they run the world, that the entire world is about them. It's the same kind of narcissism. I create the boxes that people are in, or maybe my group, or maybe my culture, whatever creates boxes. We put people in the boxes, and then we pretend as those boxes were created organically by the universe, not us. I understand that I create those boxes within the Jewish community, Jewish men, Jewish women, Jewish people who support Israel, Jewish people who don't support Israel, Jewish people who are undecided, Jewish people who are gay, Jewish people who are tall. But there's infinite boxes. But I create those boxes. And then I can say, well, Black people who are taller than 6'5", who don't play basketball. Because you ask any tall Black guy, right? Some Black guy's 6'6". Everybody's going to walk him and say, you a basketball player? Well, he's Black and he's 6'6". And he says, no, I like soccer. What? What's wrong with you? You're Black and you're 6'6". You're supposed to be a basketball player. And the guy says, I like to play soccer. Or, I'm not really. Don't like sports. I'm into chess, maybe, right? And people are shocked. Why? Because they created a box in their mind. All Black men who are 6'6" and above are basketball players. That's their mind, has nothing to do with this guy. And they look at this guy like he's crazy. Hey, dude, I created a box in my mind. And in that box, you're tall, you're skinny, you're 6'6", and you're Black. Yeah, you got to be dribbling a basketball. And the guy's like, dude, that's your box. It has nothing to do with me. But the level of narcissism that they have won't allow them to understand that they created a damn box and it's not relative to him in any way, shape, or form. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to this: the understanding that we created the box and that the number of boxes that we create are infinitive, but we put people in the boxes and pretend like they can't get out of them when they're not really in them anywhere other than in our mind. So what happens now? That is used by the ruling elite to deflect from them. As an example, bad apples. You ever heard that? In law enforcement, what do you hear? You'll have a police department that beats the hell out of everybody, drags people, and does all kind of terrible things. And what will they ask you? When you say that department has a terrible record of doing all kind of terrible things. And you know what they'll say? When they're finally caught, like the cops have beaten 10 people, shot 10 people, been planted guns, done all kind of things. This police department in this given city's done everything terrible. What will they say? Few bad apples. In other words, it's not the people that run the agency that have created an environment of distrust and a criminal environment within the agency. No. It's not the people that are in charge. It's a couple of individuals at the bottom who did it. People at the bottom did it. We can blame somebody and then you can go after some individual cops and you can pretend like nothing needs to change, right? The U.S. empire has been doing this. What we started off like, the U.S. empire's always done this. But now that it's catching up with us and we go straight to hell, we need somebody to blame it on. And Jewish people are just as good as anyone. And might I add, I believe this. I believe that the U.S. and British Empire, that there has been an active propaganda move, an active religious/political move in the U.S. and the British Empire to ensure that all Jewish people support Israel. See, it's very, very important for them to have as much support for Israel as possible, that people not question the actions of Israel, that people not judge Israel on its actions, that people not look at the history and say, from a historical context, there's some great questions here that need to be asked. Political international law. Well, wait a minute. Didn't international law say that these settlements are illegal? If you go into international law, there's one after the other. This doesn't, under international law, didn't the UN mandate that they have to give back the Golan Heights, that they're illegally occupying Gaza, blah, blah, blah. If you talk about international law and not Jewishness, Judaism, or Zionism, if you only talk about international law, the issue of Israel and Zionism becomes extremely clear. All they have to do and are supposed to do is abide by international law. I think to some extent the U.S. and the British government say, whatever you do, never, ever, ever talk about Israel through the lens of international law. We have to talk about it through the lens of Judaism. So I think to some extent they have probably, most likely, almost certainly pushed into the Jewish community support for Israel. They have supported that. They have pushed it so much so that they've had a lot of success. Let me add this too. I'm going to add this too from a religious philosophical perspective. One last thing I'd like to add. This is just Garland, thinking like Garland thinks, okay? I'm not, as you probably know, I was born, Southern Baptist. And, I'm not a Southern Baptist. I was born a Southern Baptist, but as I've often said, I didn't choose being a Southern Baptist. It chose me, right? I was born and my parents were Southern Baptist. And I once grew up and asked myself, why are my parents a Southern Baptist? Well, it's because of slavery. They came over here and slaves beat the hell out of them and said, I don't know what your religion is, but you're a Baptist now. You're whatever it is now. Whatever the owner of the slaves is, that's what you got to be. And then generations back, some ancestors of mine were beaten into becoming Christians, and there they were. And probably the first generation resisted it. By the second generation, they probably thought, hey, we're Christians. And by the third, fourth, or fifth generation, they didn't have a memory that they were only Christians because it was beaten into them. I mean, South America, why are they all Catholics? Not because they woke up one day and chose Catholicism, because Spain came over and said, you will be Catholics or we'll kill you and cut your heads off. And I'm sure the first generation resisted, and generations later, they said, yes, this is our religion. But in a historical context, it was forced upon people, and you can choose to continue with it if you want to, and there's nothing wrong with it. Or you can choose to say, it was never mine in the first place, but maybe I should question things. My nature is to question everything, right? So here's a question that I have, an issue, a philosophical thought on religion, period. The issue of supremacy, I think, is a very dangerous issue. Here's what I mean. If you believe that you are the chosen people, or subsequently, if you believe that your nation is the indispensable nation, it's the same thing. I'm above the rules, right? That's what it means. The United States is the indispensable nation. It means the world is a hierarchy, right? The world is a hierarchy, okay? A great hierarchy, yes. And where are we? At the top, of course, because anybody who in their mind comes up with a hierarchy, look, if you're going to come up with a hierarchy, you might as well be at the top of it. What would be the point of me creating a hierarchy and putting myself at the bottom? Have you ever heard of such a thing? If I came up with a religion tomorrow, hey, I'm coming up with a religion. What's it going to be called? The religion of Garland. Really? What's your God's name going to be? Garland. And what's he going to look like? Just pretty much going to be a bust to me. Right? Why would you think I'd come up with a religion? There's a new religion called Garland. Okay. And what's the good guy going to be? Yeah, he's going to look like, I don't know, Richard Pryor. And what's the bad guy going to look like? Me. And his name's going to be Garland. In this religion, the devil is going to be Garland. He's going to be a picture of me. Who the hell's going to do that? Nobody. So if you are the US and you say the world is a hierarchy, what are you going to say? We're at the top. And that ain't good. Because once you believe you're at the top, you believe you are above the law. And if you believe you're above the law, you will act like you're above the law. And if you act like you're above the law, people will resent you. They will resent you and they will hate you, and you will get cocky and you will do things that you believe you can do because you believe that organically the universe has placed you on this pretty little green planet, that at atop a hierarchy on this planet, and you'll act like that, and everybody else will resent you. And sooner or later, they'll get their day in court. And you lose all historical context. And you forget that every empire that has risen has fallen. That we have spring, winter, and fall. That in the spring, not in that order, of course, plants grow, they get green, they become stronger. Oh, they look great. And then fall comes and they start to recede. The winter comes and they turn brown and die off. And then they come back again next spring. That's all that happens. That's what happens everywhere. It's what happens to a star. It's what happens to human beings. It's what happens to animals. And it's what happens to empires. It is the nature of reality. That's the way reality works. And as an empire, if you believe that you are the indispensable empire, you can't accept that that'll happen to you, because nature and God and the universe have decided that you have to be at the top. So you can't ever go down. And when the time comes that China and Russia and Iran and other countries begin to rise up and begin to match and surpass your power, because you've been arrogant, you've been cocky, you've been over the top, and they're rising because they found a different way to do things that works for them, and it's very successful, and you've been arrogant and cocky, and you've been doing stupid stuff, and it starts to catch up with you, and your empire starts to do what empires do. It is now the fall, and your leaves are withering away. Instead of accepting that, you're going to fight it for all you are worth. Might I also add, because when you had your strength, you acted in an imprudent manner, because when you were in power, you considered yourself the indispensable nation, and you abused and you raped and pillaged and robbed and stole. You overthrew countries, you assassinated leaders, you did terrible things. Sooner or later, these other countries are going to get their day in court. And when they get their day in court, there'll be payback. And not only will they just want to be left alone, but even as they rise, you're not going to leave them alone. Even as they rise, you got to beat the hell out of them. You got to try to stop them. You got to do worse than you've done before. And they not only do they rise now, naturally and organically, but they understand that you're a threat. And the only way they can rise is for you to go down. And they're right. Now, so what am I getting at there? That is that the worst thing you can do is, let me add this. What is a narcissist? A narcissist believes that the world is at their beck and call, that everybody around should feed their narcissistic hunger. The narcissist believes that they're entitled to everything. The narcissist believes that they make the rules. Anybody who's ever dated or married to or worked for a narcissist knows that. The narcissist makes a rule one day. Nobody's allowed to yell. 5 minutes later, they yell at you. Ah! And you say, hey, you just said nobody's allowed to yell in this house. You just said it's a rule. Shut up. I'll do what I want to. They don't care. No, I didn't say that. Narcissist doesn't care. They're entitled. They make the rules. They violate the rules whenever they want. And if you call them on it, hey, you just said that, they'll just simply do not. No, I didn't say that. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't remember saying that. They'll gaslight you. They'll just lie. The narcissist doesn't care. And the U.S. is a narcissist empire. We make the rules. We violate the rules. And if you, well, yeah, we didn't say that. We don't have to do that. I don't know what you're talking about. It's pure narcissism. And it comes, I believe, it not just comes from it. It is fed. The fertilizer of narcissism is a belief of entitlement, that I am the indispensable nation. Now, why do I say that? From a religious perspective, I believe the concept, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, we were in church and they were like, yes, blah, blah, blah. And God's chosen people, Israel's God's chosen people. And when I was a kid, I used to think to myself, why God choose these people? Why not the Inuit Eskimos? And why is it that at a time when there were people all over the world, but the people in the Middle East didn't know there were people in other parts of the world? They didn't know there was Eskimos. They didn't know there was people in Australia. They didn't know there was people in the Pacific Islands. They didn't know about all these people. There were lots of people. They didn't know about them. And they said, God chose us. But they didn't know there was other people. Right. So when I would ask myself all those questions when I was a kid, what the hell? Why is God choosing people anyway? Didn't he make all of them? Why is he, right? So as I become an adult, those questions have ruminated. Those questions have continued. I'll put it like this. It's not like those are questions that I want an answer to. Oftentimes, from a philosophical perspective, those of us who have a philosophical mind ask questions for the sake of asking questions. Kind of like there was a book called Ishmael, and in Ishmael, this gorilla who was talking to a guy, and he's talking through the perspective of animals. This is how animals look at things. And he said, the tiger's walking around the cage, and the tiger says, why? The guy says, why what? No, he just says, why? He's just asking the question, why? There's no why what. Is it why that he's in a cage? Sure. Is it why are all these people looking at me? Sure. It's just why, right? And when I ask questions, why is God choosing one group of people? Why this group? Why not that group? Why not all groups? Why did he make us all just to choose one group, right? Why? All of those, it's a never-ending why. And really, it's not a question. It is a statement that says that doesn't make sense to me. That's really what it is. It is a statement. When I say why regarding God choosing a chosen people, or God choosing a chosen indispensable nation, or the nature, or the universe saying this country right here is the indispensable country. When I say why, what it really means is I don't buy it. That's what it really means. Why means there are so many questions that are unanswered that it doesn't make sense to me. That's really what I'm saying. And that ultimately, if you believe that you are the indispensable nation or the chosen people, it makes sense that there would be an alignment there, because it's the same principle, a principle of entitlement, and wherein Judaism in itself is just another religion, and people, there's a lot of great, wonderful things about Judaism. I have a lot of good friends that have been that are Jewish people. A couple of my very best friends, my own brother. And one thing I've discovered about Judaism, and I think it's from 1,000 years of being mistreated, there is a belief in helping the poor and helping the less fortunate, and that's a beautiful part of Judaism. But I believe that the British and the U.S. Empire have fed, as in every Carl Jung, the dark side, every human being has their ugly side, every religion has a good side and a bad side, every person has a good side, a bad side. That what they have done is fed, they took that part of Judaism that said the chosen people, and they fed that as a Zionist project and used that to say, therefore, just like the U.S. and England, in the same way that we can do anything we want with no repercussions because God said we can do that, that they fed that into Zionism, which really is, again, it's not even a Jewish thing. Zionism is an imperial thing. Zionism is an imperial project. But they fed that into that. And ultimately, their history is of anti-Semitism when it comes to the U.S. and colonial states of the U.S. empire and the colonial powers of Europe is very anti-Semitic, that ultimately the time may come when things go bad for them and they need a scapegoat. And that scapegoat will be Jewish people in general. That in the same way that they're arguing there's no difference between Zionism and Judaism. Israel is Jews. If you don't like Israel, you don't like Jews. That works for them from their perspective now of supporting Israel to do the imperial things they need to try to rule the world and maintain their hegemony. But if things go bad, it works in the other direction where they can then say, guess what? It's all the fault of the Jews. We would have never done it if it weren't for them. And we'd be happy to help the eternal on them. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know if any of that's going to happen, but I'll say this. I think those are the kinds of discussions we need to have. And those are some things that, me, I am a, what's the word? Stream of consciousness. Actually, that's 3 words, isn't it? I'm a stream of consciousness kind of person. And I like to have discussions on my channel that just, I'm thinking about this and I'll throw it out there and have people think about those things. Good, bad, or indifferent. Ultimately, it comes down to what I said in the beginning. I think it's a great error to point to a group of people and to say they're all good or they're all bad. These are very complicated dynamics, and these are very dangerous things. And all you have to do is look at what's happening in Gaza right now, and look at the support that they're getting from the people in Israel who are saying, "Go ahead and kill them all, men, women, children, babies." All you have to do is look at Ukraine and understand that the Banderites, the neo-Nazis in Ukraine would be more than happy to do the same thing to the people, the Russian-speaking people, the Russian ethnic people in Eastern Ukraine would be thrilled to do that. They ain't Jewish. In fact, they don't like Jews either, right? Again, but what are they? What did the Banderites say? We're here to lead the white race. In other words, this group, whether it's the Jews, whether it's the indispensable nation of the U.S., or in their instance, the white race that they're here to use because they're Banderite Nazis. These are people who say there is an individual group that is superior to all other groups. And conveniently, I happen to be a member of that group. And that gives me the justification to murder and slaughter and do anything I want to people who aren't a member of that group. It always comes back to that way when people believe they're a superior group. It always comes back to that can be used as justification and an excuse to do anything you want to any other group. And I oppose that thing. There it is. That's the best I can come up with. Thank you very much for listening. I ask everybody to share this on all your social media platforms. I ask everybody to, if you can afford it, whether it's PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, Cash App, whatever. If you can afford to contribute to the channel, I appreciate it. Substack. Follow me there. You see my P.O. box. Feel free to write me, send me whatever you want, a donation, a magazine, a book to my P.O. box, whatever you choose. And of course, follow me on Rockfin, follow me on Rumble, follow me on Instagram, share this on all your social media platforms, like, subscribe, etc., etc. I'm out.